Hi, this is Jeff with FrostyGarden.com, and today we're going to be talking about fertilizing young seedlings and garden starts. This is a really important topic for raising high-quality garden transplants, and so we're going to talk about some of the things we do. This is a topic that can make a lot of new gardeners quite nervous. Even some experienced gardeners aren't quite sure what to do and what the right things are. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about some of the things that we know about plants and also go into some of the practices that we use in our plant raising processes. When a seed germinates, the seed itself provides enough nutrition to the plant for the plant to get to what is called the Cotyledon stage. And this is the very first greenery that you see on a seedling. And it's the seed itself that provides that necessary energy to get to that point. Shortly after this Cotyledon stage, the plant is on its own for food. They get kicked out of the nest quite early in life. And so really, once the plant starts putting on its first true leaves, it is now responsible for providing its own food. It might be kind of funny to think about this, but plants don't have little mouths and teeth down on their roots where they're down there chomping on nutrients like they're at some Sunday buffet. How plants actually eat is through several biological processes, and these are typically referred to as assimilation, interconversion, and using the enzymatic process. And it's basically the plant's roots that are responsible for converting materials into something the plant wants to eat and then absorbing those nutrients so that the plant can actually use them. Now, you probably already know that plants eat nutrients and that the three major macronutrients are nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, or NPK. But what you might not know is that NPK is not directly accessible for the plant, and the plant must first convert it into something that it wants to eat. What plants actually eat are modified chains of NPK. So, for example, things like orthophosphate, ammonium, or potassium oxide, as well as several others. And you can almost kind of think of the plant's roots as down there like little chefs, and they are preparing that NPK into those modified chains that the plant can actually absorb and utilize. So we've discussed how plants actually eat, and if you're relying on something like compost or worm castings as your sole nutrition source, you now know that the plant must use those interconversion processes to get those ingredients into something that it can actually use. This is also true of granular fertilizers, and that's work for the plant that it has to do in order to make its own food. So if you think about young seedlings, they don't yet have deep and complex root systems that they can use to practice that assimilation and interconversion process. It's not that they can't perform those processes, but we can help those young plants out a little bit by providing them immediately available nutrition. We generally think it's best to use water-soluble fertilizers on our young seedlings. And the reason we think that is that water-soluble fertilizers are already that final form that the plant wants to eat. So, for example, they're already ammonium or orthophosphate. And thus, those nutrients are immediately available to the plants, and those young seedlings can easily absorb them. We find that our young seedlings heavily benefit from very light doses of fertilizer young in their life. Now, part of that is our perspective as subarctic gardeners, where we're trying to maximize growth at every single stage. We have a very short growing season with very little room for error, and so this helps pad our risks and ensure that our plants are ready to hit that short growing season with as much as they've got. We've answered the question of when plants actually start eating, so the next logical question is when should you start providing fertilizer for your young seedlings? And the answer to that question is a little bit diverse, and different people are going to practice different things, but truthfully, anytime after the plants develop those first true leaves, the plant is going to be able to use that NPK in its growing process. The gardener can choose to supplement their young seedlings with fertilizer, or you can force your plants to use those assimilation and interconversion practices with ingredients like worm castings and compost. But if your soil is particularly not nutritious, it is highly beneficial for you to supplement that nutrition with a highly available fertilizer. As for what we do, we generally start our fertilization process as soon as we do our initial transplant of our seedlings. And the reason that we do this is it helps us reduce transplant shock, and it also ensures that our seedlings have the NPK that they need in the event that they need it, and that they have to do very little work in order to get that nutrition. So, just like with humans, young seedlings don't need nearly as much food as their full-size plant counterparts. And so we do need to adjust the dosage that we use on young seedlings. This is really important so that we don't run the risk of potentially burning those young seedlings, because there is such thing as too much of a good thing. Some fertilizers out there will provide you with general guidance for use on young seedlings. And if that is the case for your particular fertilizer, we recommend following the manufacturer's guidelines. However, for the majority of fertilizers, they don't provide any guidance for seedling usage. And so for that, we have a really good rule of thumb that in general, we want to use 1/4 to 1/8 of a normal indoor dose. And we're going to give you some general thoughts on that as well. So what this usually looks like with most water-soluble fertilizers is very small amounts. Typically, we're talking about 1/4 to 1/8 of a teaspoon in a gallon of water. So it's almost barely there. And really what we're trying to do is just provide the plant with nutrition if it needs it, but we're not trying to ramp up that growth really early in the process. Again, we want to avoid the risk of potentially burning our young seedlings. We also modify the dosage schedule that we use for our young seedlings. Most water-soluble fertilizers are recommended to be applied every 7 to 10 days, and for young seedlings, we're generally using a schedule that's maybe once every 2 to 4 weeks. And as the plant matures, we may increase that application rate, but in general, our young seedlings just don't need to be fed as frequently or as much. We have some fairly strong opinions about the various ratios that are available in fertilizers, and those are the numbers that you see on a given fertilizer. But what we'd tell you is that for young seedling usage, the actual ratios aren't going to matter. What matters the most is that the fertilizer has the major macronutrients and micronutrients that the plant is going to need to further its growth. Our general recommendation for use on young seedlings is to go with an all-purpose fertilizer. Don't get too hung up on NPK ratios, because it really doesn't matter all that much. An all-purpose fertilizer is going to be just that, a very useful and flexible fertilizer that's good for all purposes. There might be one particular scenario where we would recommend a different kind of fertilizer, and that would be with tomatoes. Tomatoes will consume calcium and magnesium in higher amounts than most other plants, and so tomato-focused fertilizers are going to be of benefit to them, and you can also find tomato-focused water-soluble fertilizers. I'm sure there's more that we could say about this topic, but we're going to go ahead and leave it here. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and put those down below, and we'll try to get back to you on them. If you've got one in you, we'd love it if you gave us a like or subscribe. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.